Hi, everybody. All right. I'm so glad you're all here. I started working on nitrous oxide and methane and carbon dioxide in 1997 at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in the Duke Forest. So it's been a journey. But I've been in North Dakota for 20 years. And I have studied a lot of different natural ecosystems, and I am really pleased to be able to share with you our latest project. And I'm going to start off with the little encapsulation by a news reporter. At the end of August, there was a tour at our project that Linda and Brad Kingery attended, and the reporter did a really nice job of reporting on it and putting it on TV. So I thought maybe I'd start with that because it really nicely summarizes what's going on. And then I'll be happy to show you posters, show you slides, answer questions, or whatever you prefer. So we'll start off with this. Let me see. I got this sound. Yeah, just a second. I will crank it up.
And if it's helpful, you can also hold the mic to the speaker. Oh, yeah.
Sure it is. Ranchers, scientists, conservationists, and energy professionals met at a ranch near North Dakota to look at carbon dioxide measurements and observe data that will help ranchers better understand carbon dioxide uptake. My effect was there. Pretty good. The project is called Managing Rangelands for Carbon Capture. The project members will put together a large study at the end, develop models for other studies, and compare them to other grasslands in the state. The goal is to see how carbon can be captured naturally by grassland ecosystems and how grazing cattle can enhance the carbon uptake and the value of carbon. On the Heaton Ranch, data on carbon uptake is being collected on land used for grazing and land where cattle don't graze. Capturing carbon biologically has a lot of benefits, not only for the ground, it improves the soil, but there's potential to actually sell carbon credits on the open market. The data is collected by these sensors. They will help answer landowners' questions like how much carbon do I have, how much is it worth, and how much space it takes up.
Increase the value of our rangeland and uses for it. And carbon may be one of the monetary things that can be used to compensate for the difference between the price of rangeland and the price of cropland, which is pretty wide.
Natural carbon uptake in grassland takes carbon from the air and moves it into a solid carbon that can be then stored underground, which helps soil quality. What grasslands that are grazed are doing in terms of carbon sequestration, and as compared to an ungrazed grassland, where we find that grazing management can help improve that carbon uptake. The sensors will also detect variables that impact the uptake of the carbon, such as weather conditions and what producers can expect on an annual basis for uptake. The project is being funded by North Dakota Natural Resource Trust, Hess Oil Company, Game and Fish, and other sponsors that have an interest in carbon. When the governor said he wanted to be carbon neutral by 2030, that helped people to start thinking about this. And considering what does he mean by that? How can we do that? What are the different mechanisms? Is it say just taking it out of the air and putting it in pipelines? What do our natural systems do? The 2-year project will continue until 2024, and with continued support, they want to continue collecting data. In Mackenzie, I'm Mark Black, reporting for your news leader. They also want to have methane sensors and monitor how much methane is taken out of the air and goes into the soil in the future.
I like that one guy sitting there like this.
Yeah.
Tell me a little more.
A little more. And yeah, he's part of the Badlands Alliance group, and that fellow has invited us to present at the end of this month in Stanley and also in Dickinson, this project. So there's interest by ranchers, and I think we can all see that we have an interest by a number of different groups. And that's part of what makes this project really interesting to me, is that, you know, we're talking about sponsors ranging from the regular conservationists to oil companies. And so if this project was only about birds, let's say, I would have a certain number of sponsors. If it was only about grassland and cattle, right, then I'd have more rancher oriented. But what's nice about this is we've got all these different folks coming together and saying, well, carbon sort of is a bit of a glue that everyone can relate to, a currency they can relate to, or at least that's what we're trying to help people understand, that you can care about the carbon in the soil because of the soil quality. You can care about the carbon in the soil because of the value of it, monetary value of it. You can care about, you know, the climate change elements. And you can care about the fact that if there is a monetary value that keeps rangelands, then you're going to have more habitat if you care about wildlife. So, and that's what the rancher Lewis Heaton, our most important partner, is saying. If you want rangelands to say rangeland, he does both farming and ranching. There needs to be an incentive for this, he said, because it's just too lopsided right now. And so he's been looking at the financial end of things, and he's been talking about and looking at carbon buyers. So he's more on the finance side, while I'm doing the science side. And we have the North Dakota Natural Resources Trust, who's actually pulling all of these partners together and administrating this whole project. And they're interested in grassland conservation as well for the wildlife and everything benefits. So so what is unique about this project, having done a lot of different projects all over the world, is that we're really doing it on working lands. I mean, this is unlike most institutions that are, you know, government or academic. They are oftentimes, because of their system, doing work on small plots. They're doing work, you know, in specific research stations. But this is land that's right out there in the middle of nowhere, with a real rancher with his 150 cow-calf pair herd, doing it out, trying to make a living on this. And so it is the first that we know of its kind in the world to test how managed grazing is influencing the carbon dynamics. Okay, so when I talk about carbon in this study, I'm not talking about, carbon in the ground is one form of carbon. Carbon in the air is another form, the carbon dioxide gas. We're talking about the exchange of carbon dioxide gas. Okay, and the plus with the carbon dioxide gas is we're measuring in parts per million. When you measure the carbon in the ground, you're usually in parts per 100. Like, you know, how much of a percentage, you know, are you dealing with? So we're being able to detect small changes, you know, much better than. So it really and this is Lewis's idea. He came to me and says, well, I want to know about these carbon measurement systems. 3 years ago, I told him, okay, here's what I know, and they're expensive. And we just kept, you know, talking to people until we finally got enough support. And the North Dakota Industrial Commission became convinced that this is a good deal for ranchers and a good deal and from a climate change perspective, it's bringing ranchers and conservative agricultural groups into this conversation, which is, I think, is one of the more important elements of it. So, and we've got, like I said, all these values and multiple stakeholders. We all share this common of different elements of the same thing, which is all about rangelands. And when I started talking to the North Dakota Grazing Lands Coalition 4 or 5 years ago, And they were telling me and people like Lewis that, well, we think the grazers are good for the ground. We think the grazers are good for production. We see enhancement, but you can't just throw the cattle out there and leave them there constantly. You got to manage them, and you manage them for their particular environment. And a lot of experimental studies are done where you're managing, you're experimenting. Okay, I'm going to put cattle out there, and I'm going to put them out there every May 1st or every June 1st, and we're going to do this for a few years, and we're going to do it a certain specific way. In the real world, they have to manage according to different climates, different conditions, different amount of grass. It's harder to get to follow a strict experimental guideline. So anyway, he said, I think alternating the season of use, I'll graze this paddock in spring one year, I'll graze it in summer the next year. Because I think that's good for the ground. I think it's you're increasing your biodiversity. I think that you're gonna have better production, and you're not gonna graze out a certain species by doing it the same all the time. So I said, well, it makes sense to me. Let's give it a try. And so so it was what you call, this is what you call a real collaboration. There's a section of land that we're working on. This was his original layout, was 640 acres, and he's got, roughly 60 to 100 or more acres for each one of his paddocks. And then so that the cows can go down to the well. And that's what you call a managed grazing or cell grazing kind of design. And that's what that's perfectly fine way to go. But to do this experiment with this equipment, I needed to change things, right? In order to be able to get the measurements over a specific area. And that area has to be more on the flatter side. It can't have lots of rolling hills. So I had to, so bottom line is, what we ended up finding was a site where there's a control area that's ungrazed, and then the one to the north there, and the yellow dots are the pieces of the instrumentation. And so we had to set up fences about 11 acres in size, and these instruments are facing in the southerly direction. And I can't get a measurement directly behind the instrument, but I can get measurements all around, encompassing roughly 50, 60 acres. So what I'm doing is when that wind is coming from the southeast, and the instrument is upwind of where the fluxes are coming from, which is the exchange between the atmosphere and the grassland ecosystem, then it's picking up measurements from that southeast paddock. So it's what we're doing is we're getting high frequency information. And I'll go into that more. But like I said about carbon, we can measure carbon in the soil, and a lot of times the carbon buyers are saying, okay, give me a soil measurement. I'll send people out to take soil carbon measurements. We find out what percentage is the organic, what's the soil organic carbon content in that soil. Then we come back in 5 years or 10 years, and we see whether or not your carbon increased. But there's a lot of, your measurements have to be exactly right 5 years later. Hopefully the same people are going to be doing it, right? And that is compared to what we're going to talk about today, which is that exchange of the carbon dioxide, where you can get more real-time information. So I'm picking up information at 10 times a second, right? All over this entire ecosystem. So I'm not just getting what the plants are doing, I'm getting what the soils are doing, what the microbes, all the things inside that system is what we're picking up.
So how much noise is there in this data?
We will get to that for sure. And that's why we measure so many weather-oriented or environmental variables, to try to get a handle on what could be noise. So this is the instrument, and is a sonic anemometer, infrared gas analyzer, and there are 2 other tripods that are also holding in measurements that tell us about photosynthetically active radiation tell us about total solar radiation, reflected radiation, soil moisture, soil temperature, rainfall, humidity, air temperature. So you're getting all of these environmental covariates that we know the environment influences plant growth. We know it influences production, and therefore it would influence how much carbon dioxide is going into your system versus coming out of your system. And so this is the so this is just a little like showing you that what we're getting is the entire system. Now the cows are brought in 150 cow-calf pairs for only 2 days at a time in each one of these paddocks. And we're targeting, and they are what we call, they are external to this system in this particular design, right? So they deposit carbon in their manure that we're taking into consideration, and they harvest carbon in plants. And what we have to do to know how much is sequestered or left behind is we need to know what those numbers are. How much total amount of carbon dioxide went into plants production, right? That we can pick up from these systems, but we also have to know how much was deposited in manure, how much was harvested away. Because, and then what is left over is what we call the ecosystem carbon balance. Okay? So, and this is just an example of the cows out there around the instruments. This was as close as I could get the first time because they weren't used to me or anything. And then, but then the last time we had to picture, they were all fine with me. Yes.
How young are the calves? How close to going to market are they during the experimental time?
These are he does late calving, so he calves in May. So yeah, they're babies. And but good question. And then this is I have a field camera out there for security, and they just happened to catch a picture of there's Lewis and I, and that's the whole suite in one of instruments at one of the places. So I've got exact duplicate of this setup at the control and at the managed grazing site. So this shows you the solar panel and the battery that charges, keeps this thing powered, the rain gauge, radiometers, the data logger box, remote access to the data so that I can access it from a distance. And this is data from the week before our first grazing event in spring. And so the orange line is the managed grazing, and the blue line is the control. And these are just the raw data that came off the instruments. And so this is about 3 weeks after green up. And so you can see that there's CO2 uptake is the one above 0, and CO2 release is below. So every time you see it go up, that's a daytime. Every time you go down, that's nighttime. So the CO2 uptake is happening and is greatest at midday, and then it starts to decline. And this is giving us an indication of, okay, these units are not wildly different. There's going to be some differences between the two because the grasses are not exactly the same in every way. It's hard to find exact rangelands. But in general, their dynamics, their weather data, their carbon data are all kind of in similar to each other. And then this is an example of we did the southeast paddock first. This is about 10 days post grazing, and and there you have 1 day when the winds came out of the west, and those two lines are somewhat in accordance with each other. And then the nighttime, and then the other hump would be when we were upwind of the southeast paddock that had been grazed 10 days earlier. And you can see because that leaf area was removed, we targeted about 50% leaf area removal, that there's a little difference that the blue line has got a little bit more carbon uptake than the orange line because there's more leaf area. So leaves are like the solar panels. And the more leaf area you have, the more potential for carbon, for the carbon to get into photosynthesis, right?
You mean leaves as in trees, tree cover?
These are grass leaves.
Oh, grass.
Yeah, yeah. But it's the same principle. Yeah, yeah. Oh, this is just a regular old prairie without trees. Yeah. And then this is, again, these are data collected upwind of the southeast paddock. And you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 days. And this would be 60 days, about 2 months after the grazing event. Now, 2 months later, you can see a tendency for that orange line to be a little bit higher, giving us an indication that, whoa, maybe this grazing, when you graze it for 2 days and then you get off of it and then you allow it to recover, that you're actually seeing a little bit of a boost. Yes.
Could you repeat over 60 days?
So 60.
How many days were grazed?
There were, this is about 2 months later. Okay.
2 days later.
2 months later.
There's no grazing going on in these.
Right. So 2 months after.
So they were 2 days.
Right.
Only 2 days.
And then they were taken off after 2 days. Yes.
Just curious, so at night, the CO2 is released.
Yep.
What's going on there? Because that does not look.
You're not seeing differences at night?
So I'm just curious, what's going on?
So what's going on at night that makes it release? Well, that would be the microbial respiration. It's also plant respiration because plants breathe. But their net intake of CO2 exceeds the breath or the respiration process. Otherwise, we wouldn't have plant biomass. So yeah, and microbes are very active at night too.
You would infer that the grazing isn't affecting the.
Not at this stage, not as far as we can tell. But the nighttime data can get difficult because we have to have turbulence in order to do this measurement. So we're measuring eddies of air.
Oh, okay, so it's hard to know what's happening because the wind is different at night, is that what you mean?
If you get, like it is like at 4 o'clock in the morning,
It's quiet.
when it's super still.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know what's happening.
Right, that would be harder. And we have methods for filling in those gaps.
So that's why I noticed that there's some breaks in the
Yes.
nighttime data. Okay, got it.
Yep, that's it. We've got to have the turbulence. And that's the way it works. And I've got a poster on it if you want to go over it too. So anyway, this is, giving us some indication that, okay, maybe there is going to be a difference between the grazed and the ungrazed. And again, these are just the raw data, and we have to do a lot of work with at the end of this whole year to pull it all together and fill in all those gaps. But this is more recent, just September data. So we're like, man, there could be something really going on here. Yes.
Maybe you'll cover this eventually, but only grazing in 2 days is not very realistic for how ranches work, is it?
Well, this is what I was trying to explain in the beginning. That the way he had it in the beginning is these big paddocks where he grazed it for a week, 2 weeks at a time, right? And that would still be rotational grazing. But for the sake of the experiment, okay, we had to rearrange it because I can't cover 640 acres with my equipment, right? It all depends on the canopy and everything, but I have a certain height, and that gives me about 50 or 60 acres of area, you see? But we wanted to see that seasonal difference, so we split it into 4 paddocks, and he wanted to use his 150 cow-calf pairs, and that's the reason we did it that way.
So it was different from his usual pattern, but then it was more intense because they were in a smaller area. Is that or not?
Well, he still targets the same leaf area removal, okay? But because it's a bigger area for the same herd, it takes longer.
Yeah, so
than 2
right,
days.
but so here they're confined in a smaller
A
pattern.
smaller area. For the sake of this, it isn't that for the sake of collecting this and for doing the experiment, basically.
Yeah.
But it's the same, in principle, it's the same. It's just a little bit more abbreviated because it's a
Got it.
smaller area. Yeah. But Yeah,
So to follow up, so what you're saying is, if you were able to measure the effect on one of the bigger paddocks where they graze for a whole week, there's the possibility that the orange line would be bigger than the blue line.
well,
Possibly.
the orange line and the blue line
Yeah,
are independent of the area.
yes,
So we're getting milligrams of CO2 per square meter per 30-minute interval, right? Or per second. We're getting that. And it doesn't matter whether we've got a 5-acre paddock or a 50-acre paddock. And the reason that we set it up with these size paddocks is only because I can only effectively measure 50, 60 acres, right? And otherwise I would have been fine to just leave, because it was a heck of a lot of work. I never knew how to do fencing before. I had to do fencing with the rancher. He'd say, okay, well, I'm gonna be done with my work at 7 o'clock tonight and meet me out there, which is an hour's drive for me. And then we were out there, of course, in the summertime, it's later, and we'd be out there till 10, 11 o'clock at night. Unbelievable. But, and then he's like, no problem, you know, to him, that was just another day. But it was also part of the relationship building. If I would have said, oh, I don't want to do fencing, then he would have said, oh, well, I don't know if I'm that interested. You know, I have to be a sport here.
So are you planning on doing it in following years?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
because what I'm curious about is whether those would approve, you know, so you would kind of hope that the benefits, you know, those
Right.
something stick around, you know, presumably the roots will get deep or whatever, biodiversity would increase, you know, and so
Lots of
presumably there would
impacts.
be some stuff building up
Yeah.
that would produce ever increasing, you know.
That's what we want. We've got actually a botanist that's looking at biodiversity. So we'll be able to keep track of that. And we did the soil sampling, and we want to find out what are all these impacts, and we want to keep this going as long as possible.
But also the depth of the.
And the depth of the roots, oh my gosh, you're right. I mean, yeah, so that's super important. And so right now we were funded for 2 years. And we're working with actually, I think Shell or Chevron or something, trying to get more funding to be able to keep this going, hopefully at least 5 years, to really understand, is this just and reassure people that this is reproducible year by year by year, right? I don't know, because Jesse handles all that. Yeah. So our colleague, yes.
take all the time, but a couple years ago, when we were here in South Dakota, we heard from a bison farmer, bison
Yeah, right.
rancher,
Remember, well,
Yes.
yeah,
bison rancher, that this is impossible. He transitioned from cattle to bison
Mhm.
because he said, and this was western South Dakota, where the ground may be different and it may be different, but he said it's impossible with cattle ranching to help the soil. That cattle ranching is inevitably going to degrade
destructive.
the soil.
Ah,
And then he switched to bison
because
because
of that.
they graze differently.
Oh, the move around more.
And they, I don't remember.
I thought he was talking more about it because a lot of agriculture, they overgraze, but buffalo kept moving out.
Yeah, so the bison move more. So,
Yeah.
So that's what this is simulating.
Yeah. because of
These
the pattern.
ranchers are simulating bison movement.
because of the move.
Yes,
But
yes.
do most ranchers ranch the way he does?
Not most, although there's the North Dakota and South Dakota grazing land coalitions are working hard to promote this, to help people see that this is good for the ground. And if this is basically telling you, you're producing more grass.
Mm.
You are.
Oh,
You're
that's a good
producing more
argument.
grass
Yeah.
Buy less hay.
Yeah, that's,
and buying less hay.
This is like encouraging no-till farming in Minnesota.
Right. Yes.
Just a follow-up to that, we had a speaker come to Redmond, Minnesota, honestly, his name was just, but I got his papers. And he was amazing, he was a rancher in the Sonora Desert of Mexico, where the climate and, it's so dry there, that the ranch land, it takes thousands of acres just to support a small herd. And he started this practice of putting in a large cistern on this highest elevation and feeding that cistern, which is an open tank, to different pastures, which he had to invest in that infrastructure. And then he fenced off, I think there were 5-acre paddocks. And he was just experimenting with, I'm losing all the time. And his neighbor was using the neighboring ranch was using his ranch, the neighboring ranch was absolutely bone dry. It looked like this. With just some, tumbleweeds rolling around. And he started these 5 acres and he only kept his cows in the pasture for a day.
Right.
And he had his daughters going on horseback and they would rotate the herd every day to each of these 5-acre paddocks. Within, I don't know if it was 1 year or 2 years, he had grass that was thigh high. No one else did. And it was incredible how he has got a thriving ranch now. He's got a website. It's really awesome.
Isn't that fantastic? Yeah.
He's on the Mexican-US border.
Right.
And so he's been going around trying to promote this. What you're doing is really important work. You're showing the science.
Right, that's exactly right. We're showing the science behind it. And because I heard these ranchers talking about these stories and I'm like, okay, if that's true, then I'll see it in the data.
I volunteer at the Carlton Culling Arboretum, which is 800 acres of restored wood and prairie. And we're doing seed collection and the guy who was leading us, the, ecologist or whatever, he said, we were collecting compass plant and he said, of these trees, they just live 200 years. I mean, then they die. But the native plants, like he said, they don't know how long compass plant lives because how do you can't do a tree ring thing. But he said, they just live infinitely long. They come back every year. And so I was thinking, what kind of sequester, I'll keep it short, but where my mind goes, it's like, what's that doing for the soil?
Right.
Where's the carbon going? Yeah.
Right.
With those native plants.
With the native plants, you're
do
right.
they have many? Is this a diverse prairie or is it pretty much?
This is a diverse prairie
Okay.
without, with very little evidence of any prior tillage.
Okay.
So there's only a couple spots in that section that had some tillage. So you're looking at natives. Yes.
Yeah, Becky, could you speak a little bit to the species diversity, that was very interesting.
Right. They're, like I said, this is native prairie. And I think our botanist that came out at the beginning of this project, she'll come out again next year. She, when I talked to her in the middle of her inventory, she said, we're up to 96 species so far. I'm like, that's amazing. That is amazing. But boy, you've got to know your plants to do that. I mean, that's tough.
What about animals, birds, insects?
Oh.
Are you doing anything? I'm partnering with, you got a botanist on board, are you partnering with, I don't know, a naturalist or whatever?
Right, that's our next move to try to get this, get more people involved on the wildlife end. I mean, I'm seeing amazing birds all the time. I mean, bobolinks were everywhere. Unbelievable bobolinks everywhere. You would come out, this summer. I mean, bobolinks, sorry, yeah.
That's what I thought.
Sorry. But anyway, yeah, we got the go-ahead for this project, like last November. And I had to order the instruments, get them deployed, get everything running, and get the data you have today in a very short period of time. And so that's why but we've got private industry involved here. And this is why, being a nonprofit, I don't have to go through a lot of the things that institutions have to go through with a whole lot of paperwork. So I was able to get on the ground and get going. And like I said, and we're like, like Lewis says, well, I know they want us to get university people involved, but where are they? It's 10 o'clock at night. And it took a lot of effort to get to this point. Yes.
Yes. And so, is this like, do you foresee if this was to become like most degrading, do you foresee like being able to maintain our current consumption? Or would it then become more expensive? Because I'm just thinking that would take up more land than like factory done.
Well, I'm not an expert on factory farming versus grassland farming, grassland type cattle, but, this has been going on for a long time, right? And we've had beef, been eating beef a long time. I think there's a lot going on with imports of beef that make this, that shade our understanding of what's really happening here, but basically, American beef has supported Americans for a long time on grass. But I don't know all the details. Right.
So it could be sold.
That's what we need. In other words, this could be sold as an America first policy, but why not eat American beef? That's my assertion.
The other that is much of yesterday for the whole forest that showed the forest in the US. Is there a similar to that? Would you have any idea of like what is buried and what could be buried that's not being utilized as buried?
Yeah, there's land use land cover maps at the USGS that you should look at. Yeah, going back many years. Yeah. Yes.
This is really fascinating work, so thank you for presenting. It's really. If I'm understanding, which is a good question, we're talking about fluxes, so that probably we're making more of concentration. The other parallel thing is carbon storage. Do you have plans to measure how much of this gets actually in the soil and does it stay in the soil?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we took our soil samples, preliminary data before we got started. We also have archives of it. So if anyone wants to be able to do more detailed analyses, they can, and we'll be measuring soil again. And yeah, for definitely. But these instruments and the methods that I'm using now are considered the gold standard worldwide. We were extremely lucky to get enough funding to be able to do this in a controlled setting like this. A lot of times a person's only ordered by one instrument, but we have two. And they're absolutely state of the art.
How much are they?
Yeah.
Roughly, let me see, about, I think in the order of $80,000 a piece, somewhere in that range. And there's I did a lot of methane uptake or work with, in other words, there's organisms in the soil that take methane out of the air and use that methane for energy, right? And they're all over, ubiquitous. And one of the things that we've never gotten a good handle on is methane fluxes under cattle grazing, right? For a large area like this. I used to do work where I just take a little tiny area and measure. And next year, the same company is coming out with an add-on to this that'll actually measure the flux of methane. And you could actually see the methane going into the ground as a result of those methanotrope organisms taking out the atmosphere, which could change the conversation around methane and cattle tremendously. So I'd love to see enough funding to be able to add that to the system. And so, okay. Okay, thanks. Yes.
Are there any studies like yours around the US or in the world that you know about it and what's?
Well, what I know about is when I was in New Zealand, we worked on a dairy, and we put one of these systems out on the dairy, and we were able to, and on one plot, and the dairy cows would come in and they eat a whole bunch of grass, like 70% of leaf area would be gone. And then the cows would come back in about 6 weeks and graze that same place. And that's a different than this kind of a study, but it is a grazing one. And what we found is that if you consider the manure deposits, right, that they left behind, there was a positive gain in terms of carbon for that system, not dramatic, but in general, those cows were very, very tuned into taking as much as they could, right? And so there was some carbon sequestration, but probably not as much as this one in that super intensive dairy environment. There's been a study in Florida where they seeded a monoculture of grasses, and then they grazed one and they didn't graze the other. And it wasn't a grazing system, but it was a monoculture of grasses. And they said, are we going to see differences in the fluxes? And they did see some increase in the carbon dioxide uptake in that Florida monoculture. But because it's Florida, and because it was a monoculture, a seeded grass, a special grass, and it was just the cows came in and the cows left a couple times a year, that is slightly different than what we're doing. But they did find greater carbon dioxide uptake in the grazed system, which they attributed to things below ground, the root system, etc. But yeah, so that's the extent of what we know so far. But I think one of the reasons that this particular kind of real world managed grazing experiment hasn't been done before or published that we know of is because it is so outside the box. It's not something that you see universities and research stations doing in a real world environment with this amount of work. It's a lot of work. We're going after there and clipping the grass before they graze. We clip the grass after they graze. I mean, we run every green blade of grass through a leaf area meter. We separate the green from the brown because we got to know how much leaf area, right?
And then you come up with the assumptions you have in the first place.
Right, then we go, yep, we got 50% leaf area removal, but we made it. So, yeah. So we're, so I think, does anyone have any questions about the, the measurements system or anything else that we're doing? I mean,
Can I just ask a mechanistic question? So
Sure.
The mechanisms by which the CO2 is increased, is that stimulation of plant growth? Is it changing the microorganism? How do you?
It's as far as we can tell, at this scale, we're getting ecosystem scale, but we're getting that recovery. The grasses are allowed to rest and recover, and it's stimulating some more plant growth. And the way Lewis puts it in a very simple way is we're extending the growing season. I take the clipping data and I show, okay, this is what the grass is over the course of the season, the green grass, and you see the control has slumped down because it's mostly brown with senesces, and the green and the grazing one is a lot more green grass. It opens up the canopy, and so the growing season is longer this way, and you get more grass. So that's that.
So there's no manure on the control area though?
They're only historical manure.
Okay.
But not any new deposits. So we had to measure the digestibility of the grass in order to estimate how much manure is being deposited. Now that manure is decomposing. So in our CO2 measurement, some of that CO2 coming off the manure would be a positive, right? Or a release, right? So that's why we have to do the whole year to know for sure what all those numbers really are before we can give you the final story.
So I'm sure there's maybe a pretty direct correlation between the above ground and below ground. If the below ground carbon drops, that doesn't support additional carbon in the roots. The more the grass grows, the more the roots grow. Is that true?
Yes, yeah. The more the grass grows, the more the roots grow, and the more exudates come out of the roots, carbon comes out of the roots and delivers it into the soil and those microbes.
So thinking year over year, which 2 years earlier too, is what are all the factors that would help that you know, sort of be building blocks in the
to keep adding to that.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not 100% sure. We're just testing the grazing.
if there's more root mass at the end of year 1 and at the start of year 2, is that?
Well, plants are kind of,
They die and
yeah, there's roots live and die, and it would take a real serious root study to get down to the nitty gritty, scanning and all kinds of things.
But a lot of them are perennials, so presumably they will live for many years. And so as that, as those roots grow, you know.
Right. We would expect that, and we hope to get, you know, a root specialist involved at some point. No. Yes.
At this point in your work, what have been some pleasant surprises, unexpected surprises, or some negative, disappointing surprises in the results so far?
Seeing those differences during the day, as pronounced as they are, has been a surprise. And the lag time that we saw in the spring grazing, it took a month or more to see that difference. We didn't see as much of a lag in the fall grazing. So the last grazing on September 1st, we saw the plants starting to bounce back and be different from the control more quickly. So that seasonality does make a difference, and when you graze at different times does make a difference in the maybe in the response as well.
But that makes sense, because in the fall, if you don't graze, everything went to seed. It has no incentive to do anything, so it just browns up. Whereas you graze it, well, now all of a sudden you have to catch up, you have to seed again.
Right. You graze, it's like, oh, we gotta go. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I'm thinking of a very different experiment, which is discussed at length in Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Rating Sweetgrass, if people have read that. And she, for one of her students, did a study where they had 3 patches of sweetgrass, and one part they didn't harvest at all. And then, which would be the Western kind of idea of, well, we don't want to touch it, that would be bad. And then one other patch was half ripped out in the way some, you know, harvested and pulled out, and another half was carefully kind of, I'll take this stem, I'll take that stem. And both of those, and the one actually I think that was sort of half ripped out did the best. And then the other harvest did the second best, and the one that hadn't been touched, it looked the worst. It was the worst at the end.
Yeah, it was the worst. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing what that grazing affected and what it could be. And a lot of ranchers say the trampling even by the animals, and maybe the way that they root it out can make a difference. Yes, yeah. No, cows save the planet. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Ranchers have figured this out a long time ago, and all I'm doing is collecting the data. You know, it's not my idea. But we're just saying, where are we at, you know, and can the data support your assertions? And what's better is, what are the conditions that cause this or don't cause this treatment effect to occur? That part is harder for a rancher to figure out without all of this ancillary data to help us to see what is controlling those dynamics. Yes, Brandon.
I'll get to our break now.
Okay, sorry. One last question here.
I would just like to add, and this has been such a great experience having Beckie be part of our group, that when we met with Senator Kramer, and we talked about this, and Beckie's proving it.
Right. Yeah, I'm proving it. I'm basically taking, something that people say is happening, and I'm proving it. Yeah, it's happening. Yeah, so it's very good.